Hello and welcome to the 13th episode of Soul's 2023 webinar series featuring presentations on ecological land care. My name is Christine and I am the Special Projects Lead with Soul. I'm happy to be your host today. I live in Ottawa, the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that this webinar series and much of Soul's work is made possible by the generous support of Gaia College, Canada's leading college for professional development and diploma courses in ecological land care. Soul is also supported by its members, so if you haven't joined Soul as a member yet, I invite you to do so. At the end of the presentation, we will have 15 minutes or so for discussion. So if you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat or raise your hand afterwards and we can unmute and you can ask your question directly. And just a reminder that this episode is being recorded and it will be available on Soul's website and YouTube channel in the next few days. Finally, for today's presentation, I'm pleased to introduce Emily Heidendahl, Natural Environment Specialist with Parks, Forestry and Recreation at the City of Toronto. Emily will be presenting on Milne Hollow, a 6-hectare ravine parkland in Toronto along the East Don River, where volunteers and city staff have restored a wetland by suppressing invasive species and planting native species to support a diversity of wildlife habitat. Welcome, Emily, and over to you.
Thanks, Christine. So, as Christine mentioned, my name is Emily Heidendahl, and I am a natural environment specialist. My team is the Natural Environment and Community Programs Unit, part of urban forestry. And so we focus on community engagement specifically. So today I'm going to be speaking about the Community Stewardship Program, and more specifically, Milne Hollow, which is one of the 8 stewardship sites that we have throughout the city. So before I get into Milne Hollow, I wanted to provide a bit more of a bigger picture and some context around the natural environment in Toronto. I know that I am speaking to a national audience, so if you're not familiar with Toronto, you might not think of it as a super green space, but it is. Parks make up about 17% of Toronto's land area. That's equivalent to more than 30 times New York's Central Park. It's 1/5 of the city's land area. And so if you look at this map here, you'll see that the ravines are marked with a dark green. And so ravines snake through our city and provide recreational opportunities and green space for Torontonians. So 1/3 of the population is within 5 to 10-minute walk of a ravine, because you can see how they sort of bisect the city. And so it's accessible for many people. And we also have environmentally significant areas on this map. So those are areas that have unique landforms, unique flora or fauna, and we have 86 of those in Toronto, and those are cared for by forestry staff. So we have 60% of the natural environment area in Toronto on public land, and then 40% is located on private land, which is an interesting thing to note because we have to encourage private land stewardship in Toronto as much as we encourage public land stewardship as well. Some of the biggest threats to the natural environment include development, climate change, and invasive species, which we'll be talking about specifically today. I'm sorry, I have a cat wailing in the background here. I don't know what she's unhappy about, maybe invasive species. So my team is part of urban forestry, and urban forestry has goals that are set out by things like the strategic forest management plan, the ravine strategy, the pollinator protection strategy, and canopy TO. And all of these plans and strategies have similar goals outlined in them that our team follows. So we aim to protect our valuable resources in Toronto. We aim to increase biodiversity. So healthy forests have a diversity of species, and this helps to make them resilient to forest health threats. We also aim to achieve equitable distribution. So that means prioritizing areas of the city that have less tree canopy, and those are areas that we'll focus on planting to share the health benefits of trees. Promoting stewardship, as I mentioned, that means promoting stewardship on private land, and then also what I do, which is promoting stewardship on public lands. And then, of course, investing in these resources so that they can grow and flourish for years to come. And then partnering with community groups and other organizations that will help achieve our overall goals. So, as mentioned, invasive species are one of the biggest threats to the urban forest and to natural environments in Toronto. And so this is how they are managed in Toronto. I've spoken about volunteer stewardship. That is only one way, and that is an incredibly effective way that we manage invasive species. But we also have dedicated forestry staff that work on invasive species management. We hire contractors that will work on projects like invasive species removal. And then we also work with the Conservation Authority, the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. So now I'll speak to the Community Stewardship Program. So the goal of this program is to connect the community to Toronto's ravines and parks through long-term hands-on stewardship. So stewardship provides an opportunity for communities to come together to restore a resource that will be enjoyed and nurtured for generations. So the Community Stewardship Program had some major highlights last year. We planted over 2,000 trees, shrubs, and wildflowers at our 8 sites. We stewarded a total of 65 hectares of parkland, engaged 283 volunteers in over 90 stewardship sessions. And this year we are continuing to grow. We are planting more, we're stewarding more land, and then we are also engaging more volunteers in our activities. So I am going to dive into Milne Hollow, which is the site that was awarded the Greener Green Space recognition last year. So Milne Hollow is, again, one of the 8 Community Stewardship Program sites. As Christine mentioned, it is a 6-hectare river valley park along the East Don River in Toronto. So it is part of the Don River watershed. As many sites along the Don River and in Toronto, it has an interesting industrial past. So in the early 1800s, the park was once the town of Milford. It was used by settlers and it included a farm, a wool and sawmill, and this is where the site's name comes from. It was founded by Alexander Milne, hence Milne Hollow. There is still one remaining structure or house from the original settlement at the site, and it's a historic building, which is a sort of a unique feature. So the Don River during this time, 1800s to 1900s, was considered a working river. So industry along the river included, like I said, mills, quarries, factories. It was not a healthy place for a river. And so it took a long time for this river to be restored into something that functioned as it should. And so there was a large-scale restoration effort completed by the City of Toronto and the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority with the help of community advocates to revitalize the Don watershed. So the main goal was to reestablish conditions that would sustain diverse native flora and fauna communities. So in Milne Hollow, this meant restoring the natural environment, creating a fertile soil profile using compost and topsoil, and then reseeding the site. We also had volunteer planting events, and they planted thousands of trees and shrubs at this site. So you can see this is from 2001. The site has already been regraded. You'll see in the bottom left there is a pond, and I'll speak to that in a minute. You can also see the Don Valley Parkway in the background there, and the Don River flows next to the parkway. So this photo is from 15 years later, and you can see the success of the trees and shrubs that the volunteers planted. It's a similar, maybe slightly different perspective here, but this is part of the volunteer planting from 15 years ago. And this is our team of volunteers. So this is as of last year, I think it was last summer, we have an amazing group of dedicated volunteers that come out to this site on a weekly basis. Some of them have volunteered here for over a decade, and they know the sites really well, and they are very committed to improving the health of the site in any way that they can. So at our community stewardship program sites, we have a variety of invasive species that we manage. Um, these are just 6 of them, and these are sort of the top 6, the ones that probably pose the most threat to ecological health in our sites and in Toronto in general. And so we have many other species that volunteers manage. We'll be talking specifically about Phragmites, and getting into that right now. So if you're not familiar with this plant, lucky you. I am very familiar with it because 4 of the 8 stewardship sites have Phragmites at them. So it is Phragmites australis, that's the scientific name, or common reed. It's a perennial invasive wetland grass that's native to Europe and Asia. It was likely introduced in the 1800s, probably more than once, to the east coast of North America. It has been named, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada named it Canada's worst invasive species because of its impact on agricultural lands, but also its impact on wetlands. So this is the impact that is sort of at the heart of this problem that the volunteers worked to solve. So Phragmites has a significant impact on wetlands. It displaces native vegetation like cattails, bulrushes, and sedges, and it negatively affects and reduces important habitat for species at risk. So the management of Phragmites at Milne Hollow was one of the greatest successes that the volunteers have had. It's not the only great success they've had, but it is certainly a significant one. So we had 2 separate nodes of dense monocultures of Phragmites at the site, and volunteers worked for 7 years managing it. Now, it was easier and easier each year, and that's because they were using an innovative spading technique that was developed by Humber College professor Lynn Short. And so the area now is flourishing with cattails, marsh marigolds, asters, and jewelweeds. And I'll tell you how they did it in a minute. Just if you're not familiar with Phragmites, it is, like I said, it's a grass. It's very distinct if you live in Ontario or you travel along major highways. You'll notice it grows usually in ditches on roadsides. And also in wetlands. This is on the left here, this is the flower, so it's sort of reddish when it's flowering. And then on the right here is when the seeds are being dispersed, so it's sort of silvery and brown at that point. So that's around now. And then also the stem is unique in the way that the blades of the grass come off the stem. And there are other ways to identify it that I could get into, but I'm sort of aware of timing here. So it is definitely a problematic invasive species in wetland areas for sure. So the spading technique is a simple method of manual removal that involves cutting individual stems of Phragmites below soil surface to remove the growth nodes. And so if you know grass, if you have grass, you know that when you cut it, it often becomes more thick. And so this was the problem with Phragmites. If you were to mow it, then it becomes more dense. And that's because those growth points are once it's cut above soil surface level, the growth points will send out more stems. And so then it becomes thicker because there's at least 3 or 4 of them at the base of the stem. So Lynn Short's technique, you cut below the soil surface so that you're not disturbing the rhizomes, which is the underground root and energy storage system, but you're removing those growth points at the bottom of each stem. The goal is to starve the underground rhizomes of energy by removing the part of the plant that photosynthesizes. So it's simple, it's very labor intensive, and so I wouldn't recommend it for large patches of Phragmites where you're using um, community uh, community efforts to remove it, because it does take a lot of effort, and you do want to be able to spade the entire patch in one season for the best results. So we had been using shorts techniques since 2015 at Milne Hollow and at a few of our other sites. But in 2018, the city partnered with Humber College and EcoSpark to formalize this technique with a research project. And so we worked with EcoSpark and Lynn Short to look at how effective this manual spading technique is. Volunteers collected data from 4 of our stewardship sites, and then it was published in a final report. You can look at EcoSpark's website to find it, and it goes through um, all of the study sites and all of the data that was collected by volunteers and analyzes it. It's a really great read, and you can read more about the volunteer sites in there as well. The conclusion generally was that all of the sites saw an improvement when they were spaded 1 time per season compared to cutting above the soil surface. And then plots that were able to be spaded 2 times per year saw an improved suppression of Phragmites. There was also a survey that EcoSpark did to look at the sort of volunteer satisfaction of being involved in a research project like this, and they all felt empowered by being involved in the study, which was a great additional thing to have happened. So here I just want to look at some before and after photos of Milne Hollow. So if you remember the photo I showed you where it was at the top of a slope, I noted this pond in the bottom left. So this is one of the spots where we had a Phragmites monoculture. So if you look in the bottom right of the screen, you'll see those fluffy seed heads. And there was more out of the frame of this photo. So quite a dense monoculture here. We fast forward to 2021, you'll notice changes in the hydrology in the pond. So the pond isn't holding as much water, but you'll also notice that there's no more Phragmites in the bottom right corner. So we have goldenrod, we have cattails, and again, with our other Phragmites monoculture at Milne Hollow, this one is the wetland, and it is a density of Phragmites, and you can see those reddish flowers at the top of the stems here. And then also on the left of the screen under the willow, you'll see more of it. And so there's even a volunteer in there getting to work. And then 7 years later, what you'll see is cattails. You can see sort of that hot dog shaped seed head on them. And then we have goldenrod. There's a lot of other species that sort of grew out of the existing seed bank. So once the Phragmites was suppressed, we saw things like native asters, the goldenrod, of course, jewelweed, 2 different species of cattails. So one is native and one is unfortunately non-native. But because it was more diversity than just a monoculture of Phragmites, it was still a win for us. So the improvements at the wetland at Milne Hollow will further benefit the community in the area by providing additional ecological services. So it cleans the water more effectively, the air, improves drainage at the site, which is really important because part of the reason the site had these wetlands dug and the pond dug was to help mitigate stormwater runoff. So it helps to make the site more effective in doing that job. And so it also prevents the spread of these plants to different parts of the city, which is really important as well. So that is my final slide, and that's the end of the story of Phragmites at Milne Hollow. So if you're interested in learning more about how we manage the plant, if you have questions about the technique, or if you just have any questions for me, you can email me at greentoronto@toronto.ca.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this presentation.
No
As
problem.
somebody who is originally from Toronto, I loved the beginning, the overview of the importance of these ravines and how significant they are in comparison to most other cities. Like to have this natural resource and that is so rich and so valuable. And then these efforts over time, when it was such an industrial site along the Don River, to one where there has been this increase in appreciation for and the importance and understanding of the need to have something healthier than such a degraded, polluted environment. So I think we've come a long way, and I'm just interested now to get into some more questions about this community stewardship model that Toronto and your team has been involved in. And that is, first of all, when you say that this partnership, it's really nice to see that there's been the researchers from Humber with EcoSpark, and then with the community volunteers collecting data, and for you to even understand what's going on with the success of removal of invasive species. How much of that has been translated and shared with other parts of the city or with other organizations?
That's a really great question. So, in January of this year, I participated in the Ontario Invasive Plant Council conference on invasive species, and I presented on this research partnership there. EcoSpark, which they are community science organization. That's sort of what their focus is. And so they have presented at different conferences the findings of this project. And then, of course, Lynn Short, who is the professor at Humber College, she's now retired, but she is a very energetic person. She's a force, and she has spread the word all throughout the city. But yeah, so we've worked really hard to share this information, and it is getting picked up with different organizations. It's also included in the Ontario Invasive Plant Council best management practice for Phragmites. So for anybody who's researching how to best manage this species, then they'll now see that Lynn Short's spading technique is included as a manual method of removal for it. So that's really encouraging.
It is encouraging. And then as you showed the pictures, the before and after, it's so powerful to see, what was there before and what has come afterwards. And you said, yeah,
Absolutely.
the ecological functioning, the drainage, the air quality, everything that you've been doing is in the management practices that are, and I think you were talking about how the volunteers are really dedicated to improving the health. Like they understand that the there are processes that are happening all the time. And well, one question I have related to that is if they're focused on improving the health of a site, how much do you think is the importance of them coming week by week by week? And is it
Yeah.
usually 1 year? Do they dedicate more than 1 year to this program generally? How does that work?
So it varies. We have a lot of students that are looking to get their volunteer hours, but I would say that there's a certain point every year where people see the results of a project that they've been working on, where they see like it kind of clicks for them, where they see the change and the improvement. And so I think if they see that, then they're definitely going to come back. However, we have volunteers that have, yeah, like I said, have volunteered for over a decade, in some cases over 2 decades, because the program has been in existence for 20 plus years. Um, but yes, I think that once they see the results of these projects year after year, it's a reward in itself, and it's easy for them to come back at that point.
Well, and I know that the government even has a grant out right now for organizations to increase or partners to increase ecological or environmental literacy. And it seems like in this age where we are facing these environmental crises of climate change and the biodiversity loss, invasive species, those are all challenges that, as you were saying, are in the public realm and in private spaces as well. So everyone needs to up their level of knowledge about this, and in terms of how they're managing their own little pocket or involved in these community stewardship projects. So what are your thoughts or observations about the people that have been involved in their knowledge of the bigger picture?
It again, it's a big range. I would say that a lot of the volunteers we get are just looking to find a way into community. They want to like get to spend time with like-minded individuals, and they don't necessarily have a sense of how big the scope of the problem is with invasive species management in Toronto. But then once they do start to understand how prevalent these species are, and a lot of what we do is educate volunteers on how to identify these species. And then they walk home from a stewardship site through the ravines and they see them pretty
Yeah.
frequently. So then it becomes, uh, it becomes more of an awareness for them. Um, but we also get university students who have studied forestry that come out to volunteer with us because they want to get more hands-on um, experience.
Well, and what impact do you think this program, the Community Stewardship Program, has on staff who get to be dedicated to particular sites in Toronto?
Well, it is a similar impact as it has on the volunteers. I know for myself personally, I I saw the change at these sites, and it was sort of, I guess what I see is when I teach somebody how to identify the problem and how to help change the future of invasive species management in Toronto, and then they start sort of practicing that in me is like the biggest reward for this job. And I know that a lot of the people I work with share that. They also become attached to these sites as well. And with this model, it's not necessarily that the city staff are from that neighborhood, although in some cases, the preference for staff is to work at a site that is in their neighborhood, but they become attached to the site nonetheless.
And attached to a site and then noticing and observing the changes or the improvements, I guess makes you even more dedicated, hopefully.
Absolutely, yeah.
So do you have any statistics or evidence about the increase in fauna? If one of the goals is to increase the flora and fauna, do you capture any of that information as well?
So we have historically had a challenging time monitoring our sites. Um, However, we have engaged the Conservation Authority to do um, maintenance plans, which include a full ecological land classification survey of our sites. And so we've had sort of baseline data collected for that. And then we plan to have another collection of data in a few years. And so that'll sort of show us a sort of a change over time based on the data that they collect in the future. So at this point, we don't have any statistics or numbers on it. It's just anecdotal, but we do see an improvement to these sites. And also to changes in the hydrology, especially with Phragmites, because it absorbs so much water. And
Yeah.
so you'll see different species using the spaces when there's more water in them.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. So it's good to know that this is all sort of increasing. So you say the number of sites for the community stewardship program is increasing, number of volunteers. Is that correct? And
Yes, yeah.
is that a political decision? Is that a department decision? Like, how does that get worked out that this is something that is valuable and worth investing in?
So it is, we received funding because of the ravine strategy. And so that has helped us increase the number of staff we have, which was the historical problem in increasing the number of community stewardship program sites. We've only ever had one staff person um, coordinating the program, but also attending each of the sessions. And so it was challenging to see a way to expand. And now we do. Um, and so we're just sort of planning how to best do that equitably, given where our current sites are.
Yes. Okay. So the ravine strategy, then Toronto has a biodiversity strategy. And does it fit with a climate change strategy as well?
I imagine it does. I'm not well versed in what the climate change strategy goals are, but I would assume they're similar to the ones I outlined in my presentation.
Well, and certainly even just the trees being planted but able to grow up, and that obviously has an impact. But no, it's very it's such important work, and these sites, I think that there is gaining recognition that we need to have these naturalized areas that are helping with the ecological functioning of our city for flood mitigation especially is huge these days. And so any advice that you have for other jurisdictions that want to start a program like this?
Yeah, well, I think that you just need to stay dedicated to your project areas and not to grow too quickly because it requires uh, it effort that you just can't walk away from these sites because in urban areas invasive species will often always be a problem because we're dealing with disturbed sites. So if the volunteers were to walk away from any of these sites tomorrow, then the work would sort of regress. And so it's a commitment to these projects. It's a long-term uh, effort, and you do see amazing results, and so it's worthwhile. But I would just say to stick with it if you're starting up a project like this.
Yes. Okay, good point. Yes. Yeah, we have to recognize that they're not just put in and then left. No, we have to be monitoring and actively stewarding.
Mhm.
But it is really inspiring, and I think one other point that you made that was having a strategy for the municipality is also very helpful to link it to and to get the resources, available for staffing as well. And then I think the volunteers gain so much out of this work when a lot of people, want to get involved. There's that community connections that people make that you mentioned that are really, really important. So to do this even together as a community has additional benefits as well.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right. Well, you mentioned it, and I'll mention it again, but this site is one that was recognized, Seoul recognized it as a greener green space. It all the same principles and approaches to land care that we value and are extremely important for nurturing the nature in our cities and the health of our cities. So we do appreciate that we have this example. Thank you very much, Emily, for presenting today. And this is the second last presentation for this year. So the next one and last one, we're going to British Columbia, to Summerland, British Columbia, to a federal government site. And that is one that has created and produce this beautiful garden that has a lot of indigenous plants and native plants that are important to the indigenous communities around the site. So that's a model that is now being incorporated in other parts of the country and other provinces. And so that is also a green space, and we look forward to that presentation as well. But thank you very much, Emily, for today. And this webinar will be on our website in a couple of days, and we look forward to many people checking it out.